Hello, it's me. Today's question is, can I explain the Hinterkaifeck case? For those who don't know, this was a horrific murder case in Germany in 1922. It was never solved. A family of 6 were found bludgeoned to death in their farmhouse, and some strange things happened before and after the crime. Some people believe that the killer or killers were never caught. I'll explain what happened in the case and why it's still talked about today. This is the horrible murder mystery of the Kaiser family. First, I'll describe the setting of the crime. The Gruber family lived on a farm known as Hinterkaifeck, or back of the farmyard. It was located near the town of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, Germany. On March 31, 1922, Andreas Gruber, his wife Chiselia, and their 6 children were living and working on the farm. They had a pretty isolated existence. Their farm was surrounded by fields and forest. The nearest neighbors were hundreds of meters away. The first strange thing that happened in this case was a series of small thefts from the farm. In February and March of 1922, items were stolen from the farmhouse and the surrounding buildings. These included food items, cash, and clothing. It seemed like an outsider was coming onto the property in the middle of the night and stealing these things. Strangely, all the items taken were stored in places that would have been difficult for an outsider to access. For example, there was a cupboard that was used to store food in the living room. The murderer or murderers would have had to stand on a chair to reach this cupboard. This wasn't the only time the murderer or murderers would use a chair in this way. More on that later. On March 31, 1922, at around 1:30 p.m., Andreas went into the village to do some shopping. He intended to return home that evening. At around 6:30 p.m., he was met by his son Joseph on the road. The two walked home together. When they arrived at the farm, they noticed that the gate was wide open. They couldn't see inside the house, so they called out to Chiselia, but she didn't respond. Andreas carried on walking to the front door and knocked on it. Still, no one answered. He tried the door and found it was unlocked. He walked inside and turned on the light. That's when he saw his wife lying dead on the kitchen floor. She had been struck multiple times with a heavy object and was still clutching a broom in her right hand. Andreas immediately ran outside to try and flag down passing motorists, but there was no one there. He ran back into the house and found the lifeless bodies of his 5 other family members. All of them had been bludgeoned to death. The murders had obviously happened sometime between 4:30 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. It was soon discovered that the killer or killers had ransacked the house. They stole money, jewelry, and clothing, as well as the family's 3 rifles. It seemed clear that whoever had killed the Gruber family hadn't lived on the farm with them. If they did, they would have known that the rifles were stored in a locked gun cabinet. Whoever committed the murders knew where the weapons were kept, however, because they had stolen them. One theory was that the thieves had come across the Gruber family's farm by accident and decided to rob and kill them. However, there was evidence that someone had stayed in the farmhouse for several days before the murders. Food was taken from the cupboard in the living room. Someone had also slept in the children's bed. The killer or killers had obviously waited until Andreas left for the village before committing the crime. It seems likely that they knew he would be gone for a few hours. But why did they wait so long before killing the rest of the family? Another piece of evidence was the number of blows each victim had sustained. Andreas had received 9 blows to the head, while his wife had been struck 18 times. The children received fewer blows, perhaps because they died quicker than their parents. The police believed that the person responsible for the murders used a mattock as the murder weapon. This was based on the injuries to the victims and the fact that a mattock was missing from the Gruber's shed. This theory was later disproven, as a forensic expert determined that a mattock would not have caused the type of injuries seen on the bodies. The murders were brutal and horrific, but it appeared as if the killer or killers had taken their time with the crime. There was no sign of a struggle, and the victims had probably been subdued before they were attacked. The brutality of the crime suggested that the perpetrator or perpetrators had been angry and vengeful. But what could have caused such a brutal attack? As I mentioned, the Gruber family lived on an isolated farm. It seems unlikely that someone they knew would have murdered them in cold blood. It was theorized that the murders were actually committed by a stranger or strangers who had come across the farm by accident. What would have motivated this person or persons to commit such a horrific crime? Perhaps they were trying to steal enough money from the family to escape the country. Maybe they were desperate or had a sick mind. It's impossible to say for sure. The murder shocked the local community, and the press quickly picked up on the story. People began speculating about what could have motivated someone to commit such a brutal crime. Theories abounded. Soon, every German was talking about the Hinterkaifeck murders. To this day, They are considered to be one of the most notorious crimes in German history. But why is that? What makes this case so infamous? Well, the brutality of the crime certainly shocked the German public. 6 people were bludgeoned to death in cold blood. The killer or killers showed no mercy. But there was something else about the case that captured the public's imagination. It was the fact that the killer or killers were never caught. The police investigation was botched. Evidence was lost or destroyed. Witnesses were unreliable. It seemed as if the perpetrator or perpetrators had gotten away with murder. Or had they? Some people believe that the police were able to identify the killer or killers, but they were never brought to justice. According to these people, the murders were committed by 2 men who had been traveling in a stolen car. They stopped at the Gruber farm looking for somewhere to hide. When they realized that the farmhouse was empty, they broke in and waited for the family to return. When they did, the 2 men murdered them and stole their belongings. The police allegedly had enough evidence to arrest the 2 suspects, but they were never charged. Why? Maybe the police wanted to protect the family of the suspects, or maybe they didn't want to hurt the feelings of the local community. Whatever the reason, the 2 men were never brought to justice. Others believe that the murders were committed by someone close to the Gruber family. This person would have known how to enter the farmhouse undetected and would have known where to find the weapons. But why would someone close to the family commit such a brutal crime? Maybe they were jealous of the family, or maybe they wanted to steal the family's land. Jealousy or greed could have motivated the crime. But what do I think happened in this case? I believe that the Hinterkaifeck murders remain a mystery to this day because the police failed to properly investigate the crime scene. They didn't collect all the evidence or interview all the witnesses. As a result, the killer or killers were never brought to justice. But what do you think happened in this case? Let me know in the comments below. And those are the horrible murders of the Gruber family. It's a crime that has never been forgotten, and it probably won't be for a long time. So what should I cover next? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching.